Life Audio.
Welcome to the Untangling Prayer Podcast. I'm Rachel Wojo, and each week we unravel life's knots through prayer. Here you'll find practical wisdom and prayer encouragement to guide you through life's hardest seasons. Join me as we untangle life's messes together, one prayer at a time. Welcome to the Untangling Prayer Podcast. I'm Rachel, and I'm so glad you're here today. I have a special guest, and I know I say that every guest is special, but I really mean it when I say that Mary Marantz is a very special guest. Mary, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh my gosh, Rachel, thanks so much for having me. As you were saying that, all I could think was like, Richwood girls unite.
That's right. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So for those of you listening who don't know this part of our story, both Mary and I grew up in small town Richwood, West Virginia. And though our paths did not cross very much while we were growing up, hardly at all, I can faintly recall maybe one or two times hearing about a story from my younger siblings, but I'm a little older than you. So we kind of grew up in different eras. And then also we went to different schools. So that had an effect on it as well. But it's been fun as grown-up adults to revisit and to just share that small town experience in our lives since then, because neither one of us live there now, right? So It's a very different world that we live in now compared to how we grew up. I love Richwood, West Virginia. I love that a lot of my family still lives there, as I know yours does as well.
That's right.
I have sweet passion for it. But you did grow up in a single wide trailer, and then you made your path to law school. And not just any law school, but Yale Law School. And so tell us a little bit about what your journey was like going from that single wide trailer to Yale Law School, because that's a pretty big hop.
Yeah. Yeah. It's in one hand, it's kind of like, we've seen this movie. We've heard this, we've read this book before. It is an underdog trope we are familiar with. Humble beginnings to the Ivy League, or humble beginnings to like sports stardom. I assure you that one was not my story. But we're familiar with this idea of starting really small and going really big. Rory McIlroy just won the Masters yesterday as we're recording this. And like, of course, the story is about like growing up in this tiny town in Northern Ireland and his hardworking parents who worked multiple jobs because they saw that their child had a dream. And so in some ways, my story is very much a copy and paste version of an underdog story we know. But when we look a bit deeper, like especially with my first book, Dirt, I really wanted to tell that story through the lens of not so much look what I have done, but more like, rather than talking about this upward explosion of mobility, let's talk about the spark that came in the generations before. And how do we look at this story, even if it has like muddy parts to it, with this lens of grace and making peace with your past, and your story does not disqualify you. And just sort of this belief, and this kind of gets into underestimated, of even from a very young age, Rachel, I felt like God was saying, one day I'm going to put words to it and your story will make sense. Your story will not be wasted. And so I've kind of had to really reckon with and make sense of like, does that by definition mean it had to be a great success in order to matter? Or did it just always matter and the success is sort of the icing on the cake? So I'm sure we'll get into all of that, but that's kind of the short version.
Yeah, I love it so much. So you've released this new book called Underestimated. And I just wondered if you could share, how has your faith really influenced your understanding of being underestimated?
Yeah, I've been kind of joking that I feel a lot like David. I felt a lot like David in the field most of my life. Like, not only was he like overlooked by the people in the room, it almost feels like they forgot he was even there. Like, oh, right, we have one more out in the field. And I think this may potentially be from the book David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell, but I've heard it in like some sermons and things like that, of this idea of David was out in the field practicing on much smaller targets, like wolves attacking his sheep. And so when it came time to use that same slingshot to take down a giant, it was actually a really easy target to hit because it was much bigger. And I was on a podcast not too long ago, and it kind of blurted right out of my mouth, this realization of David used a hidden season to work on his craft, but he didn't necessarily use it to work on his character. When he gets his sort of at the palace moment, it is his character that undoes him, potentially is about to undo him being there, not his craft. And so the whole kind of journey of Underestimated, I started out to write this book about when other people overlook you, when they look right through you, when they doubt you, you know, like, oh, that whole energy of like the t-shirt I wear in the photos, underestimate me, that'll be fun. And as I sat down and actually started writing this book, I realized it was going to be about 20% that, because let us be real, that's a big part of it. It's part of it. But it was going to actually be 80% about when we do that to ourselves. And there's a one-liner at the top of the cover of the book that says, because the person counting you out the most just might be you. And you know this from writing books. The books have opinions about what they want to become. And they will sort of reveal it to you as you're writing it. So I thought it was going to be all about when other people do it to us. But it actually becomes much more a deep dive about why our stories, whether we started small or maybe we had everything handed to us, but something in our story makes us think we can't be trusted, that nobody can be trusted, including ourselves. That I think that whole picture is like me really starting to understand plans that God had for me never needed somebody else to co-sign them. And me chasing this fear of man, this man's approval, this validation from external forces made me spend, decades feeling really hollow and burned out on the inside, because proving people wrong is a powder keg, and we can, talk about that. But yeah, I think that's it. That's really it in a nutshell, is like, where is it that we're trying to get this validation from, and who says we need somebody else's approval?
I really appreciate this. Part of what I think one of my favorite illustrations in the book is where you talk about being a Popeye in a Julia Roberts world.
Yeah.
And I think that really resonated with me because I am a people pleaser. I'll just be honest. I have very strong people pleasing tendencies. I was the girl who always kept all the rules. I was, even my husband will joke and tell you, yeah, she's the one who always puts the shopping cart back, and not just back, but exactly where it should be in the parking lot. And so when I look at this contrast of I am what I am versus pick me, choose me, love me, what inspired this comparison for you?
Yeah, we spent, decades, I'm like, is that true? And yeah, about 2 decades, we'll say, teaching photographers how to make themselves a market of one. And when I say that, I don't mean an isolated business or a hold everybody else at arm's length, they're your competition sort of business. What I mean is that when people are coming to you to hire you, there is no other option for them. There is no comparison. There is no shopping around, because they know, for us, I have to have Justin and Mary in particular photograph my wedding. There is nobody else who can be there with me on that day. And how do we actually go about building these kinds of businesses where we don't act like commodities? When we talk about this concept of start with why, that of course brings up Simon Sinek's book. And he has a really beautiful quote about how only companies who act like commodities show up every day and have to prove their worth. They act like a commodity, so we treat them like a commodity. Those who start with why know that they're not like anyone else. They are different, and everybody knows it. And so when we're talking about this Julia Roberts, Popeye versus Julia Roberts, it's referencing My Best Friend's Wedding, which is a great movie, a great film. But at the end of it, spoiler alert for everybody who hasn't seen it, Julia Roberts goes chasing down Dermot Mulroney behind poor Cameron Diaz's back. And she says, pick me, choose me, love me, let me make you happy. And I joke in the book that that's sort of like the people pleaser's mantra right there. By the way, I think putting the shopping cart back where it goes is an act of integrity, not an act of people pleasing. So just want to make sure I say that. It tells me a lot about your character that I sort of already knew, but that's very confirming. And so anyway, this, Popeye is sort of famous for saying, besides I eats my spinach, I'm tough to the finish or whatever, is I am what I am. We would walk photographers through this exercise, this marketing exercise called positioning, where it would say, I am blank because I am not blank. Where the tricky part is that both things needed to be arguably good things. You couldn't set up a straw man. That's a, philosophy term where you're just setting up the weakest version of your opponent. You couldn't set up like, I am good because I'm not bad, or I'm talented because I'm not a hack. It had to be things that reasonable people could disagree on, because what you're doing is you're giving your audience a chance to take a stand along with you. You're giving your audience a chance to go, wow, they believe what I believe. These are my people. I have found my people. And so in photography, we would say, I'm a person who believes classic never goes out of style because I am not trendy. And we would say things like, I'm a person who believes black and white will show you how it felt, whereas color will show you what it looked like. And so we're taking a stand. It's not that we would never photograph in color, but we are saying this is how we believe that storytelling should happen. And our most ideal brides who found that, it was like in a sea of 42 tabs open, it was their sort of like, if you know that movie Hook, where he kind of pulls Robin Williams' face back to look young again, and he says, there you are, Peter. There you are. In a sea of 42 tabs open, does this even exist, what I'm looking for? There you are. I've been waiting for you. And so, photographers can apply that, authors can apply that, entrepreneurs can apply that. But here's the thing about it, Rachel, is so if positioning is step one, step two is to make sure it passes what I call the lukewarm litmus test. Because what so many of us will do is we will show up as we are. We will show up with all of these quirks and these, sort of intricacies that make us memorable. These things we're passionate about, these things that we believe, the things we would change in the world if we could. And then we start to observe other people around us and we make surgical precision adjustments. We begin to carve off all of the extremes that made us interesting in the first place. We begin to whittle ourselves away. We race to the middle carrying our own buckets to water ourselves down so that we can belong. And like Niles Crane said on Frasier, mediocrity is the hallmark of popularity. And we lose what made us remarkable in the first place. So am I cutting so much off of myself to make myself palatable that now when my people come over and they would have been passionate, they instead feel this sort of lukewarm response of maybe, meh, maybe. And that's true whether you're going to, have a ministry in the world or be an author or a business owner or whatever it is. Are we losing the exact combination of how God made us, all in the name of fitting in for what the world has told us is acceptable?
It's funny that we should talk about this because just yesterday I said to my husband, a conversation came up with our girls and, we're at the dinner table talking. And I said, well, I guess I've always been too weird to be in a clique. And I think there's an element of truth to that in my own life that I've struggled to find my people because I have some oddities about me that never made me feel like I could just slip into the mediocrity. And yet at the same time, I've felt that tension of wanting to please people, of really just wanting to fit in. You write about this positioning and what does it look like to go from just being a people pleaser to positioning? How do we start to move?
It honestly starts with a really hard thing. When we would teach this in the course, unsurprisingly, the positioning statement is one of the hardest exercises that we would walk people through because it's hard enough to even know who you are, right? I say in the book, talking about people pleasing in particular, for some of us, it's been so long since we've even thought about what we like, since we've even thought about who we are. We don't actually even know the answer anymore. And I just want to hold there for a second and let that one, hang in the air because I think that there's somebody in particular who needed that one. I think that this happens to moms a lot who get really used to putting all of their needs and desires and, dreams and personality
on the back burner.
So long that it's like, when you're in college or high school, you have an opinion about everything. It might be wrong and you might be changing it as you go, but you know who your favorite artist is. You know what your favorite color is. You know what your favorite food is. It's like we go through this whole place where we're getting to know ourselves where it's like, it feels super urgent to even know the answer to all of those things. And then life goes on and you start to put other people first and you start to try to blend into a world that tells you how to belong. And it's like, who is my favorite musician? What is my favorite food? Is pink still my favorite color? It is. But we start to really lose touch with all of those things that feel like the authentic us. I read a book once called Simple Abundance, and she was talking about going into stores when you're shopping for clothes and actually holding them in your hand and asking yourself, does this feel like the authentic me, or it's just what everybody else is putting on right now, the trappings of what everyone else is putting on? And I'm telling you right now, that works. That works. Go into a store, hold it and go, does this actually feel like the authentic me? Your authentic self will answer. Yeah. And as soon as I started doing that, it was like, floppy hats are super popular, but they don't feel like me, so I'm not going to do it. And so it's one thing to know yourself. It's a whole other thing to have the courage to own it and to show up with the belief that the world might actually need
Yes.
more of it. And so I think it's not a overnight fix. It's a becoming, it's a process. Age helps with that a lot. Your 40s are when you just really start
Yes.
feeling like I don't really have the energy to pretend anymore. But I think it starts with just even asking yourself, like, who am I and what do I like and what do I stand for? What would I be willing to draw a line in the sand and say, I believe this because I don't believe this. And I would just challenge the person listening, don't take some of the easy ones. Don't take some of the easy ones that, like, I'm going to take a line in the sand for, what my faith is. You've established that one, right? Like, talk to me about something that's like just a more personal thing. Not that faith is not super personal, but a more quirky thing, a more like thing that you would like to see on social media more. Are you pro AI or not pro AI? Whatever. I'm making stuff up on the spot, clearly. But like, it's so tempting in this moment to go, oh, I would draw a line in the sand for my faith. Well, of course you would. Like, we know that about you. Like, this audience in particular, we know that about you. Take it to the next step.
Feeling overwhelmed? Searching for assurance of God's presence? Meet An Untroubled Heart by Kara Stout, a 30-day morning and evening devotional designed to calm anxiety and help you find God's lasting peace. Each morning and evening, Kara's beautifully written devotions offer a reminder of God's presence and faithfulness, giving you the space to release your worries and focus on His steadfast love. Each devotion features a key scripture verse and a closing prayer, interwoven with stunning floral illustrations that make it a lovely gift. Written by a mom who understands the weight of anxiety, worry, and grief, this devotional invites you to make God your greatest companion and find rest in His loving care. It's like praying with a friend, guiding you toward hope, stillness, and trust. Find An Untroubled Heart today on Amazon and wherever books are sold.
Take it to the step where you not only believe what you believe about God, what do you believe and love about how God made you? Right? About how He wired you to be. Very specifically, very uniquely. Knitted you together, counted every hair on your head and said, I would actually like you to have this kind of sense of humor. And what are we like not willing to say? Maybe the world needs more of my movie quotes. Maybe the world needs me to talk about Care Bears in a serious thought leader book. Maybe that's going to hit somebody in a way that it's never hit them before. So it's one thing to know who you are. It's another thing to own it.
Yeah, it really is. I agree 100%. I think there's such a discovery process for many of our listeners. They are ones who have experienced very hard things and a lot of loss. And so I think of what you've just said applies to them so greatly, because when you have been a caregiver for many years, whether it was caring for an aging parent or caring for a child, and we have both in our audience, there's a piece of your identity that is lost when that person is gone.
Yeah.
And so there's this whole reset that happens where suddenly all of your time is not filled with caring for someone else. And you step back and go, okay, wait a minute. Who am I? And what do I actually enjoy doing? And I remember after my daughter Taylor passed away, I took so many bike rides, really reflective bike rides in nature, just asking that question, like, God, who am I and what do you want me to be? What do you want me to do with my life? Because clearly it's transitioned significantly and I'm not really sure how to handle that. So I think what you've just said is super important for all of those folks listening. I think about this as a people pleaser. I want to go back to the people pleasing for just a second, because I think so many of us, because we're so perfectionistic, we get stuck waiting for permission, for someone's seal of approval to say, oh, yes, you're there, and now you can keep going. So I know you talk about transformation and how boundaries play a part in that. So I would love for you to talk about, how did you really move from having that hard transformation boundary sort of thing to go away from the intersection of people pleasing and getting stuck there.
Yeah.
I didn't word that question exactly the way I wanted to, but I think you know where I'm going. It's just that we can get so stuck in this intersection of people pleasing and waiting for permission.
Yeah.
And then it feels really lonely and we feel lost. So how do you move through that intersection?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for everybody who's listening at home, the whole book is sort of premised on this idea of fear's a really boring liar and that it's a shapeshifter. It'll put on all these different faces. And the faster we can name the different faces, be able to go, oh, I know how you're showing up. Oh, you shifted again. I know how you're showing up now. The faster we can kind of suck all the air out of the room, and fear might not leave the room, but it loses all of its power. So we have perfectionism, people pleasing, procrastination, imposter syndrome, even a fear of success. So 14 in total. Every chapter is a different one. And they have some really fun chapter titles. So chapter 9 is people pleasing is a lonely intersection. And that chapter starts off saying there is no there. For so many of us, we are waiting for this moment of arrival. We say things like, I'm just not there yet, because we're waiting until the moment we wind up at the crosshair intersection of these two streets called Paid Her Dues Avenue and Waited Her Turn Street, whatever the case is. And what that really is to say is that it's got two components. It is the people-pleasing component, and then it's waiting on a permission that never comes. And so when we're talking about the permission that never comes, it actually becomes a very self-fulfilling prophecy. It becomes a very cyclical, like the more you do it, the harder it is to break, like a habit loop. And so if you are constantly, we kind of have to even just like anchor out here for a second of like people pleasing starts for most of us in childhood. Mm-hmm. It becomes the mask we think we have to wear in order to be loved. Somewhere along the line, our little minds got the message that to be in conflict with someone basically was to lose them, which basically was to risk our survival, right? Like kids need the grown-ups in the room, the actual grown-ups in the room. And so we people please because we're so terrified that any amount of separation feels like a threat to our very survival.
Right.
And so one of the things people pleasers will do as adults is they will crowdsource. And I see this happen at my retreats when I have them, and I'll actually call it out and say, research is an over-delaying tactic. Or like crowdsourcing is an over-delaying tactic. And so they will ask 10 different people to co-sign on their plan in the hopes of validating what they've done because they never learned how to self-validate as a child, right? When we receive approval and validation in our youngest years, it doesn't actually turn into us being dependent on other people to then do that as adults. We learn because at that stage, we are learning how to be internally by what we're observing externally. And so we learn how to be our own self-validation. We learn how to be our own self-approval. If we didn't get that when we were little, we have to become this grown-up in the room who can be trusted that I talk about in chapter 3 and reparent ourselves to teach ourselves that. What we instead do as adults is we crowdsource and we ask 10 different people what they think and we get 10 different answers. And then we're more confused than we've ever been because now who do we please by following their advice? Right. Mm-hmm. And so the more that you do it, and this really interesting, there's so many full circle moments in this book that when I was writing it and they happened, it was like the head exploding emoji. So I talked earlier about we whittle ourselves away. We carve off all the things that make us interesting in the name of fitting in. There's a quote at the end of that chapter of people pleasing that says, the more we seek outside validation, the less we trust ourselves. And the more that we then need it the next time, we whittle away our sense of self. We whittle away our sense of self and we do not feel like we can be trusted. And so just in the same way that in chapter 3, I talk about how making small but important commitments to ourselves and actually keeping them. This is a conversation I had with Dr. Allison Cook when she was on my podcast, will actually expand our capacity to believe we are the grown-ups in the room who can be trusted. In the people-pleasing chapter, we find out it can go the opposite way too. If we make these small but meaningful requests for other people's approval, we actually become more and more dependent on it over time. So every day we're making choices and every day we're moving either more towards feeling like we can be the grown-up in the room or feeling like we need the world's approval.
And that is on display in all of our lives every day when we scroll social media, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that is like one of the major decisive factors on how we're absorbing that and how we process it when we see it, what choices we make to react and not react, and what choices we make to share and to not share. So it's very important, I think, to understand that when we're faced with those decisions, to be true to who God made us to be and to be true to ourselves and make those decisions well in the everyday. I think that's how we avoid the comparison to begin with, right? But then it's easy to get caught in that cycle. And that's just one small little snapshot of it on social media. But we have that in our big business decisions. You and I in the author world, that can come when we're shopping or pitching our book proposals, when we're, looking for opportunities, whatever those may be. Really interesting, I think, to consider all of those factors. And I don't want to give the chapter away because there's so much richness there, but just thought it was so important to start to draw the boundaries. And that chapter really solidified it for me. So anyone listening, I think you'll want to dive in there. I didn't think of this before, but my husband and I are reading a book right now called How We Love. And it goes back into the very initial beginning of it, explains that as a child, this is where you develop the first habits of how you choose to love other people and what you think about love. And one of the types of people that they name in that book is a people pleaser. Yeah. And so I think it's an important tie-in to what you just shared. Now, I want to talk about fear because fear really is like the overarching theme of this book in so many ways. And what's the most common fear that you hear about from people? I know you do a lot of coaching. Yeah. And so what is that most common fear and how do you approach it?
I'm going to guess that the most common one, and I'll explain the reason why I think it's the most common one, at least the one that people will admit to themselves most readily, is going to be perfectionism. So chapter 10 is called Perfectionism is Hiding with Better PR. And it kind of plays on this idea of like, what if hiding just hired a really good marketing team and got a really good glow up in the form of a rebrand and started calling itself perfectionism? And there's this part in the book where it says, not since the Got Milk people has there been an ad campaign that has made something so plain Jane vanilla seem so sexy and so sought after. Like, what did that focus group, look like? How did they convince people to indefinitely delay their dreams, all in the name of this belief that perfect would keep them safe? That's really what's kind of underlying. We think if we can just be perfect enough, if the thing we're putting out can just be perfect enough, no one will ever hurt us again. And the reason that is such an effective strategy for fear is because it rebranded in a way where we actually have convinced ourselves it's a good thing. Like, we are happy to say, oh, of course I haven't sent my book proposal yet. I still want to tweak a few things. I'm just such a perfectionist. Oh, of course I still I'm going to launch that website, but I just need to read through it one more time for typos. I'm just such a perfectionist. And we say it as if it's an A+ thing, an overachiever thing, a thing that only those of us who hold ourselves to the highest standards of excellence would ever do. To be one of the common people who would be happy to throw in something that has a C+ performance, right? And so it's kind of a noble vice in the form of we say it and we don't actually believe it's a bad thing. So it's a lot easier for us to go on doing it. But that chapter really talks about what we're doing there is this hope that we can eliminate all criticism. So I actually think the criticism fear is probably the fear beneath the perfectionism fear. It is, we're absolutely frozen in terror by the idea that somebody might have something bad to say about us or something we've created. And like I say, in the criticism chapter, you cannot bubble wrap purpose. And there's no amount of shrink that will ever keep you safe. That voice hissing in your ears that says, shrink yourself up a little bit smaller, hide in plain sight. The world can't hurt you if it can't find you. That voice is never going to tell you that there will never come a day when you'll actually get to show up and do work that matters and be immune from criticism. It's going to get you to indefinitely delay the dream, all in the name of being safe.
And I think so many people who are listening right now, and another targeted group of our audience is folks who they have something, a nugget of something that they know they're supposed to do. It's like this ultimate truth in their brain of, I believe this is what God created me for. Yeah. And yet they have not acted on it. I know this because of the feedback I get from various episodes. And so I think it's super important. How do you flip that fear script? How do you flip it?
Yeah. I've been jokingly saying, and not joking, not joking at all, that this book is for the person who feels like they're being called up to more. They're being called up to greatness. They've always felt that on some deep sense of a level, but they simultaneously doubt that someone like you can ever get there, right? It's like this, there's a Groucho Marx quote that says, I would never want to be a member of any club who would ever have me as a member. I would never want to join any club who would ever have me as a member, right? It's like as soon as we can do something that we maybe like dreamed of reaching for all these years, as soon as it's happened to us, then suddenly it must be no big deal. Because if we did it, then it must not be any big deal. And so for everybody who's listening and you like flinched a little, like, ooh, that hurt a little, when Rachel said they have this, this glimmer of something in them, this nugget of something in them that's like, I know I'm not doing in obedience what God has asked me to do, what he has equipped me to do, the talents that he has trusted me with. I'm burying them in the ground. Right. I know I'm not doing it. And I cannot shake the feeling that I'm being asked to go rise up to more, not because of who the more will make me be or how people will look at me, but because I know that there was good work prepared for me to do in advance. Yes. I'm not doing it.
Yes.
So here's what I want everybody, if that made you flinch when Rachel said it, or it made you flinch when I recapped it, here's what I want you to hear about fear. When I was writing this book, I said earlier, it's based on the premise that fear's this, it's a boring liar. We go through every different face of fear I can think of throughout this book. And really, like in the chapter 2, which is, fear is a broken script, like I wanted people to know some characteristics of fear before we could even move into doing the work we came together to do. I have these two dots connect in my brain in a way I'd never seen them connected before, Rachel. It is the high that all of us as writers are chasing when we can put something together we've never seen quite put together that way before. And it was, what if fear attacks creatives in particular because it is jealous that it itself is not creative at all? It is not tethered to muse or melody or the original force of all creation, short of being able to throw its voice to sound like us, because if it sounded different, we could catch it every time. And to be able to shapeshift into these different faces just the second we get a handle on the perfectionism, here comes imposter syndrome sneaking in the side door. Short of those two abilities, it is not gifted at all. It is not creative at all. And if we go back to the Bible, by the way, we see a lot of these same boring scripts being used on people thousands of years ago.
Oh my goodness.
Fear's using right now.
Just this morning, Mary, I was reading about Jacob. It explains, he's going back to his homeland to face Esau after stealing his birthright, after all these years have passed. And the verse says, in fear and anguish. And Jacob made his decisions. And then it tells what he did. And then 2 verses later, it says, and then Jacob prayed. And so it's like, wow. In this particular case, he didn't pray first and have this huge conversation with God about his decisions. He was actually scared out of his mind, made the decisions first, and then was like, okay, Lord, yeah, and I kind of need you to bless these things that I've just done.
Yeah. None of us have ever done that, right?
Because he was afraid. And so I love all that you have to say about fear. I feel like we could spend all day, can't review the entire book, obviously, but I want to wrap up a little by talking about the inner work that is happening. And so there's this concept that you say that consistency compounds over time. Yeah. And for me, that was so important because my story. I've got 2 decades that I've been trying to serve in online ministry, write books, and I actually have 9 years between traditionally published books. So the average person might look at those 2 decades, and actually someone did ask me on a podcast interview not long ago. He said, what kept you from giving up? That's such a long time frame. And so I love this concept that you have consistency compounds over time. It's sort of this beautiful thread throughout your book. Could you give an example of how small, faithful actions transformed into something really important in your life, so that our listeners can hear an example of that, because I think it's so hard to be faithful and committed.
Yeah. So real quick, just to kind of close the loop from our previous question, I want to make sure that people hear this in terms of like, how are we flipping that script? Like, how are we not saying I feel afraid and then, just doing whatever and saying, oh God, please figure it out for me. Which is, we've all been there. Please bless this now that I have run off the cliff.
Yeah.
And so that script that we flip for is like, Fear's not a very creative guy. He uses the same scripts on all of us, but he is a very busy guy. So that makes him this productive overachiever who prioritizes, and he would not show up and bother you unless you were about to do work that matters. So the flip of the script is, when fear shows up and is boring and uncreative and so predictable, we use it to predict we're on the right track, because he would not bother us unless we were about to do work that matters. So fear just showed up. Good. I must really care about what I'm about to do. And what I'm about to do is probably going to help a lot of people. And so that really leads into this, what your question, like that is if that's the like, grab it in the moment, don't be afraid, just do it, leap anyway kind of energy. Now we add into it, okay, how do you do that day after day after day when nothing is happening? How do you show up? How do you stay consistent? How do you drop the inputs, the quarters in the piggy bank, as it were, when it feels like I got the courage and I did the thing and it did not matter? And so for me, this is when I must really care about this thing gets its teeth. This is when it gets its legs. This is when we say, is this thing going to actually stand for what it believes in or not? And we start to move into, what you're talking about is chapter 13 is, chapter 13. That's right. Chapter 13 is distraction is a clicking, I say that every time, a ticking clock, not a clicking talk. And it's really all about just, consistency and how it compounds. But skipping ahead for just a second, we get into this success is a slippery slope chapter, and how we keep pushing this boulder up the mountain, and then we lose our grip and lose our way at the last minute before the breakthrough moment, and it rolls all the way back down. It's because we were trying to push a boulder up a mountain called me, my starting, my survival, my stability, my security, my success, my significance. And the opposite of that too, we make this our success about us, but we make our scarcity about us too. My embarrassment, my disappointment, my failure, how I might fall flat on my face, the ways that other people might hurt me. And so we make that true leap. We get teeth to the I must care about this work statement we made earlier when we stop saying what might go wrong and we start asking ourselves, yeah, but who might it help? Who am I? We don't climb this whole mountain just to reach our own dizzying heights of the vast views we can take in and look at what I climbed and look at what I did. You don't climb a dizzying height like this and not come back as a guide for someone else. So if we truly are doing work we care about and that it matters, then it has to matter in terms of how are we a guide for somebody else. And so on those days when you're 9 years in, when you're 9 months in, when you're 9 hours in, I wrote this book Underestimated for 12 hours a day for 12 months, and I was on my face most of the time. I was curled up in the fetal position most of the time, Rachel. I wanted to quit basically every single day. And what got me up off the floor was this picture in my head, the 4 avatars of real women I knew in real life who this book is most for, and the generational change I believe that can happen in their family trees if they go through this arc of transformation this book offers. And so consistency compounds over time is this idea of there are virtuous cycle people, there are vicious cycle people. I talk about them in the very beginning in chapter 1. These are the people who implement, they execute, they achieve. What? Like it's hard. Wins beget wins. Momentum begets momentum. Virtuous cycle, baby. We ride that buck and bull market up and decidedly to the right to infinity and beyond. And then there are people like me, who stutter and start and stop and start over. We're all or nothing. We're all in or we completely fall away. This motivation and defeat cycle we keep repeating. And in chapter 13, I talk about these 2 dots on the same starting line on a graph and how our virtuous cycle person keeps kind of like consistently putting in the inputs, making good decisions, turning that win into another win. And it begins to compound really slowly at first, almost imperceptibly. But then you add in the variable of time and it becomes this upward explosion. It all just compounds, much like investing in your retirement, right? It's really slow to start and then it just starts taking off. on most weeks of the year, we'll say, not every week. And then for those of us who keep stuttering and starting and stopping over, we never get a chance for wins to build on wins. So we go all in, and then we drop down to nothing. All in, and then we drop down to nothing. And eventually, in this Paula Abdul worthy 2 steps forward, 2 steps back way, we just sort of crash back out at 0. And I am somebody, Rachel, who spent my whole life believing that excellence should win. Excellence alone should be enough. Excellence is what should matter. That is not how the world works.
It's not.
There are people showing up who are far less excellent, far less integrity, far less concerned about whether it's going to help people who are winning simply because they're showing up with consistency. So my goal is to get the excellent people to show up with consistency, and maybe, the people who aren't so excellent will get a little quiet. But no, we can fix consistency. We can't convince somebody who's only doing consistency that they should also have excellence. So my people are the people who are excellent and who just need to get the courage to show up more and put their carts away.
I think that's one of the reasons why I admire you so much, in that you know how to identify what is needed and gently urge someone to step outside of themselves and step into someone else's story. And so what I hear you saying of go back and be the guide for our listeners today, and I know they're all over the place, but there are some targeted folks that just come around all the time to Untangling Prayer. And some of them who are listening right now, they know who they are. They really believe God has called them to a bigger story, maybe than what they're living right now. But they do struggle to show up and be consistent. And so what would you say as we wrap up here, what is your deepest hope for the readers of Underestimated?
I truly, from the bottom of my heart, believe that this book is for anybody who's let fear keep them playing small. The most bullseye target audience for this book are the people who have some mud in their stories, who's made them feel like it's not safe to trust anyone, including myself, these generation changers, because these are people who are wildly gifted. They have already done so much and come so far. Maybe they were the first in their family to go to college, or own a home, or parent with a secure attachment, or take care of their animals throughout their whole life, whatever the case is. They have already done so much, but they have hit some sort of upward ceiling. They feel like they cannot break through to get to the level, this next version of them that they're truly being asked to step up to. And they just do keep kind of flinching at that ledge moment. They keep flinching at that breakthrough moment. They self-consciously, they make eye contact with all the people watching at home. Oh, wait, somebody's going to actually read this book. They're going to actually listen to this podcast. They're going to actually watch me on stage. Like, just kidding. Just kidding. And they self-consciously glance back down at themselves. They make it about themselves again for just a minute. They lose their grip. They lose their way. And the boulder rolls all the way back down the mountain. If those people can stop starting over and can truly break through to the next ledge, the ripple effects from that are going to shoot around the world like 1,000 times. And I just hope that when I get to heaven, I get a little glimpse of what that kind of generation of people, that kind of group of people getting set free can go do. So that's my hope. That is my hope. It is nothing short of generational change. So, no pressure. But I truly believe, like, when this group of people can start trusting themselves as the grown-up in the room, they're going to become the guides for countless others. And it's just going to go on and on from there. And it's going to be really cool to watch.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate you.
Same.
And I want you to make sure that you tell folks where they can get a copy of Underestimated and how to best connect with you.
Yeah, so I have 2 places I'm going to point your people. The first is in my second book, Slow Growth Equals Strong Roots. We introduced these 5 achiever type characters, and they actually carry over into Underestimated, of how the 5 achiever types get stuck playing small. And so we have the performer, who's always on their toes, needs to show both themselves, but also for sure other people how far they have come. I am your classic performer. We have our tightrope walker, who could care less who's clapping, but they need higher and higher death-defying feats to feel the same amount of good. The masquerader hides in plain sight in this kind of razzle-dazzle move, shoves other people in a sleight of hand into the spotlight so that they can hide right there in plain sight. The contortionist is the classic people pleaser. They contort because it is easier than to be criticized. And our illusionist in the distance has convinced themselves that all the conditions to begin and they themselves must be perfect before they can even start. And so if you go to achieverquiz.com or marymarantz.com/quiz, MARANTZ is how you spell my last name, achieverquiz.com. The quiz takes like 2 minutes, 10 minutes if you overthink it. The questions are light and easy. In true Mary form, we go deep with the results. I'll tell you how your type Play Small gets tripped up and how you move forward from there. So achieverquiz.com. And then if you go to namethefear.com, we actually have up, Rachel, for your people, depending on when this comes out, they can for sure grab the first chapter for free and download that and start reading right away to get a feel for my writing, make sure it's a good fit for them. And then we also have up, if it's any time in the like sort of like during launch week or around there, we also have the whole audiobook for free for them. And they can find all of that at namethefear.com. And then it's just at Mary Marantz on Instagram. Tell me what your achiever type is. Tell me if you listened to the episode. Tell me if you've read the book. Let's keep it going over there.
Well, thank you again so much for being here. And to all our listeners, until next time, God sees you, He hears you, and He knows your needs. Thanks for joining me on the Untangling Prayer podcast. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who could use a little hope. And be sure to subscribe for more. Until next time, keep seeking, keep trusting, and keep praying.
Jesus wants our fears to launch us toward faith. Then He grins and says, "Do you trust me? Because together we can do this." With Mornings with Jesus, you can start your day in a positive way. Find hope through inspirational stories and scripture. Go to lifeaudio.com or search your favorite podcast app for Mornings with Jesus. You can also download the Abide app for biblical meditations at abide.com.